Post-Impressionism. Dun, 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 dun. Post-Impressionism is basically everything that happened after Impressionism. It's basically an extension of Impressionism, or just a lump of stuff that happened after Impressionism. Mostly known for these paintings, all are going to have vivid colors, thick paint, and distinctive brushstrokes. Do you know this one? Starry Night. You got to know it. It has vivid colors, thick paint strokes. You'd have to say, don't you think? Yes, it does. And that's by Van Gogh for Amy. Have you ever watched that show with the Doctor Who guy? And he gets, anyway, you have to watch that. That's why that's in there. So Van Gogh produced lots of art, 900 paintings, over 1,000 drawings. And he had a brother who was an art dealer, and he always supported Van Gogh because Van Gogh couldn't sell any paintings, even though he wanted his brother to sell them. So at first, back in the old days, Van Gogh, he got himself like a temporary post in a coal mining town where he was trying to be a missionary. And then the church were like, you can't act like you're poor. You're like representing the church. And he was like, well, then I'm not going to do it because I have to live with the poor if I would be poor. So he had that kind of framework in his mind going there. One time he went to go live with his parents because remember, he didn't have any money. So he spent all this time walking with his cousin who had been recently widowed. Anyway, Van Gogh kind of got a crush on her. And he was like, oh, would you marry me? And she was like, no, never, never, which is like Niemer. And then he went to her house, his parents' house, and he was like, oh, let me talk to her for as long as I can hold my hand over this candle. And then the candle started burning his hand, and his uncle smacked it out of his hand. Van Gogh had some things going on upstairs in his brain. I'm not too sure he was straight up. One time he went to go hang out with his cousin, who was a painter, and he was like, hey, Anton, will you help me, like, teach me how to paint and stuff like that? And Anton was like, yeah, here's some plaster casts. Just go draw these 100 times every day and just keep drawing them, drawing, drawing. And Van Gogh's like, that's not what I want to do. I want to paint from life. And Anton was like, no, you got to paint the casts. And so he was like, forget it. I'm done with you. So he left there. Now, here's the thing. Initially, Van Gogh's work was really somber, like this picture right here called The Potato Eaters. And then he was complaining to his brother Theo, why can't you sell my paintings? And then Theo was like, because they're too dark. Look, the current style of these bright Impressionist paintings. Go look at the Impressionist paintings. So Van Gogh was like, okay. So he went and he looked at the works of Claude Monet and Edgar Degas. Remember from last week? You know, if it's a water lily or if it's a ballerina, it's Degas. Anyway, after he saw those works, he's like, wow, I'm going to use bright colors too. And look, the difference, dark to light. Boom, just like that. Van Gogh started painting all his paintings really bright. And he painted outside a lot. Well, one day he met this guy, Paul Gauguin, and they became really good friends. And they were hanging out, but they used to fight a lot about art and all kinds of stuff. But then they became roommates, but they were still friends, but they still got in fights with each other. And Van Gogh was always afraid that Gauguin was going to leave him. Anyway, this is Paul Gauguin's work, who's also a post-impressionist. Now, Gauguin was broke all the time too, just like Vincent, and he always wanted to live in a tropical paradise. Like he worked on the Panama Canal, and he ended up living in Tahiti. So he did all his paintings right here. But before he went to Tahiti, him and Vincent Van Gogh were roommates. So they made presents for each other. So Van Gogh painted a self-portrait of himself and gave it to Gauguin, and he made himself look like he was a monk. And then Gauguin did a painting of himself, and he made himself look like an outlaw, like he's got a most wanted poster there on the wall. So that's the difference in their personalities. Anyway, Van Gogh was afraid at one point that Paul Gauguin was going to leave him, so he stalked Gauguin with a razor. And then Gauguin was like, Vincent, you're crazy. Get away from me. And he's like, no, you can't leave me. And he took the razor and he cut off his own ear. And everybody knows that story. Then he wrapped it in newspaper and he gave it to Rachel. And he was like, hey, keep this object carefully, would you? Anyway, Gauguin was like, you're crazy. I'm out of here. So he never saw Van Gogh again. Meanwhile, Van Gogh, here with his ear chopped off, ended up getting admitted to a mental hospital. Very sad. And he was in and out of the mental hospital for the rest of his life until one day he went into a field. He was very depressed and he shot himself in the chest. And then he died in bed 2 weeks later. And that's the story of Van Gogh and Paul Gauguin, both post-impressionists. And that's all we got for this week.